In this video, we are going to understand the concept of CSS specificity. CSS specificity, as you guys can see, is a concept or set of rules by which browser decides which CSS property should be applied by what all set of selectors. So for example, I am trying to apply certain styling on a element, and I'm writing that styling with a set of selectors. For example, ID, class, by specifying pseudo elements. So if my this styling is going to be applied on that element or not, if other CSS is also applied on that element, that is decided by CSS specificity. That is also helpful if I am going to override or write a styling for an element, and on that element certain stylings are already implemented. So I can decide the by calculating the priority of my selectors, I'm going to decide to apply on that element and make sure that my CSS would be applied on that element. So let's understand the rules of that. There are certain rules. The specificity of the ID selector has highest specificity. Then, for example, hash example or hash ID, hash my ID, anything. Then it is followed by the class selector, for example, example dot class, anything. And attribute selector, for example, type attribute radio or type checkbox, type select, anything inside this braces would be considered as attribute. Then pseudo classes, for example, uh, hover, nth child, last child, focus. So they all come after ID selector. Then the specificity is of the type selector, for example, element itself, h1, span, b tag, and then styling applied on the pseudo elements, for example, before, after. So this is the order: highest is ID, then class and attributes and pseudo classes, and then type selectors and pseudo elements. There is one thing to note here is that in the universal selector has no specificity, similar for combinators, as into I mean to we use it to use it as to calculate or apply CSS on siblings or child, so they don't have any specificity. And similar for pseudo elements, if for example is not and has, but is not has no specificity, but the elements or selectors inside is not has will have specificity depending on the highest selector. Few things to note here is that important, there is this important tag, this important has highest specificity. So even if I'm applying certain styling on ID, I can override it with important tag. But it is highly discouraged to use it. Use it only if you don't have any other option and you want to override something which cannot be overridden by normal CSS or styling or ID selectors. Then inline styling, that has also high selectivity, even more than ID selector, but is lower than important. There is this pseudo selector called where it has zero selectivity, specificity, and also the unlike is not has, or the also the selectors inside where pseudo selector would also have zero specificity. Then this rule is if two or more elements, if two or more selectors are having similar specificity, then the last rule wins, as in whatever is written at last will win. I have used these four resources to understand specificity in CSS. I'll add it in the video as description for so that you guys also can understand. So let's understand with the help of examples. I have this HTML with me where I have this division, and I'm setting color. As you guys can see the styling, I'm setting the color of this span. What color am I? So I have certain rules. First rule is I'm using id and then span to decide the color of color green, and then I'm using class attribute and then span and setting the color to purple, using two attributes or type selectors div and span to set the color to blue, and then a simple single type selector to set the color to red. Let's see what color it is going to be. It is green. Why? Because this is having one id and two attributes, type selectors, so this has the highest specificity. What if I write here is like this? So what color is this? This is purple, because this has now the highest specificity. Even with this highest specificity, let's add important tag here and check what. So this is now red. So even though this has highest specificity, the lowest one with lowest specificity is applying this css styling because of important tag. What if I um, now what if I keep specificity of two things, because this two is having type selectors, now this is having also type selector. Let's see what it. This is blue now. Why? Because this has two type selectors, div and span, and this has only one. What if I write change the occurrence? This is still blue, and let's now this is red. Why red? uh, because let's change it to, it is blue now. Why? Because both of them are having similar specificity, but this one is written at the last, so this is following last rule, so this wins. But what if I write it as, now this is coming blue but I want to make it red, so I'll change it to do, sorry, I'll change it to div and this span. Even though both of them have similar specificity and are having one type selector only, div and span, but this instead of coming, and it is written at the last, but still it is coming as red. Why? Because uh, if I'm specifying something at this level, as in directly the element, so this will take preference, so that is why it is coming as red. Let's also understand one more example where this example will demonstrate where we can use important so we can use important if we want to override styling, inline styling. So if I let's let's go to the example number 2, and this, I'll remove this. So this is red color. I'll save it, and then let's change the color to foo to color green. Will this take effect? No. Why? Because inline styling is applied. So in such cases, we can make use of important, because important has higher specificity than inline styling. So this will turn to green. Uh, let's also understand one more example. Um, let's go to let's calculate the specificity of all the elements here. The specificity will represent one as in if it is containing any id, b if it is following the rule number 2, which is rule number 2 is class attributes pseudo, then rule number 3 is type selector and pseudo elements. So a represents rule number 1, b 2, c third. So this is following none. So this is 000 li, which is one type selector. No class, no ID, so 001. Li. So this has two type selector, 002, 111. It has three type selectors, so 3, no ID, no class, no type attributes, 003. Similarly, you guys can see here. For example, this has one ID. No, nothing is following roll number 2 or 3, so it's 100. This the here type selector, one ID, one not. Not is falling under rule number 4, where it is not it doesn't have its own specificity, but the selector inside it will have the specificity. So there is this one uh, type selector, so it will have one A1 represents ID, and for foo C1. Similarly for is bar, this is rule number 2, so B1. Now inside is we are going between, or any number of selectors will follow or will select the highest selector. So between the class and id has higher specificity, so it is going to be from this it is going to be 1a, so a1 and b1 c0. There is one site, website which you guys can use to test your understanding. This is pretty fun exercise you guys can take, where you guys can calculate the specificity by, for example, this is representing the attribute or what selectors are. So it has one selector, attribute selector. So the specificity of it is going to be 0 1 0. Similarly, you guys can play this small game. I'll link it in the description. Hope you guys would have understood the concept of CSS specificity.